In today's video, we're going to talk about the Benchtop 6-inch disc 4x36 belt sander. I'm going to go over what I've learned about it so far, a little bit of how it functions, tensioning, stuff like that, as well as some testing, and in my opinion, will be thrown there in the middle. Let's get right into it. Now, before I yank this off of here and bring it to the bench so we can get a closer look and I can show you how it functions and how to do maintenance, etc., I want to talk about the footprint. A lot of times when I'm buying tools, that's the hardest thing to figure out is how much space is it really going to take up when I actually have to use it. I have a small-ish shop, right? It's like maybe 1.5 car garage kind of size. I don't have a lot of places to put things. Everything's mostly got to be benchtop for me, or I have to give something up. This was really the only space I could fit this, and unfortunately this has to hang out, but that's okay with me. I don't walk behind this. So let's talk about what you've got to deal with here. Now, there are three important factors here. The first is that the dust collection is on this side here. So if you need access to that, you will have to have something off to the left, or at least a hose that can make a really tight bend. We also, on the back on this side, have the tensioning. So maybe you never have to do that. Maybe you only have to do it once. But the panel has to be pulled out and you have to be able to get a wrench or a screwdriver back there. So you do need some extra room if you want to have access to that. And of course, this stands up, so it gets a lot taller. For reference, this cart it is sitting on is 24 by 24. And the dimensions I give you are going to be what I call like the comfortable dimensions. Lengthwise, you're going to want at least 20 inches. You're going to be better off with 24 to buy you some room to kind of stand either side of it. But if you really kind of crimped yourself in here, you could do a 20 inches. Now, if you want to be able to tension and have this table out, you're going to need at least 15 inches, something like that. If you've got long screwdrivers and Allen wrenches, it's going to need to be a little longer. This table itself is about 7 inches. So if you wanted to lose this, unless you're using it, you'd save about 7. It does fold down to save maybe 2.5 inches. Something like that. A lot of this comes down to whether you care about the ability to access the tensioning at all times or whether you are willing to take it off of wherever you put it and deal with that and then put it back on. If you don't care about the tensioning and don't care about this table, it's about 9 inches, but I would warn that to get the belt on and off, it has to come out. So this is about a 4-inch belt, meaning you need to be able to pull back 4 inches to get it off of there, or else you're not going to be able to change the belt. Now, height-wise, this little guy is removable, but it's about 12 inches with this on there. And of course, this model stands up, and then you get about 25 inches, give or take, of total height here. So you couldn't put this underneath something unless you had the ability to clear this if you wanted to lift it. If you never plan to use it in this configuration, you're obviously going to need the ability to put things over it, but you won't need the full 25 inches. Now, in terms of user height, I'm a little over 6 feet. This cart is at about 33.5, and then the top of this belt, I have it about 44 inches, and I find that to be a pretty comfortable positioning. It does make this slightly low, but I'm willing to give that up and go a little lower to work with this, to have this at a better angle for me. So take that into consideration. Wherever you put it, it's either going to bring your workpiece higher up or lower down between the two of these. I hope that gives you a good idea of the footprint here, because for any kind of benchtop tool in small shops, we're all trying to save space, maximize space. It's all about space efficiency. So hopefully that allows you to know, can this fit my shop? Can I use it fully at this size? The first thing we're going to do is walk through some basic setup stuff, how to put this table on, how to put this on, how to lift this up, how to change the belt, tension the belt, track the belt, that kind of stuff. The things you would do right after you get this tool. We'll talk a little bit about mounting as well. Now, in terms of mounting, this has 3 bolt holes, 1 on the back and 2 on the front. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of great areas to put like clamps. So while this is a weight where you could pick it up and put it down, not the strongest guy, but I don't know, 40 some pounds maybe, it's going to be hard to clamp it onto a bench just by clamping on it. So you would probably need to put this on a piece of plywood and then clamp the plywood down if you were planning to like store this under somewhere and lift it back up. But otherwise, it mounts pretty easily, 3 holes. It stays in place, it does really well. Now, the first 2 things you have to do when you assemble are put on this table and this guy right here. So we're gonna come in closer and we'll start with those 2. Now, this guy does tilt up and down, and we'll talk later about how good it is at that. But it's just a single knob holding this in there. That's all it really is. It's got a little kind of pinpoint in this area right here but there's nothing else on the other side that holds this on. So while that does make it easy to take on and off, obviously you can already imagine there are some issues with how stable it is, but this is very simple to apply. The washer, this goes into here, and then you square it up by hand. Like you can see from here, there's a variety of angles you can go with as well. Now this guy right here does a really good job of giving you something to brace against so that nothing just flies right off of here. You can square this up to 90 as well. The included wrench works basically everything on here. I really suggest getting a magnet, just sticking it to the cast iron base, and that can hold this guy on here. So let's flip this around. Now this guy comes on and off using 2 bolts right here. You will see these 2 right here, and it allows you to do some squaring of this to make sure that if you want to use this as a reference point for 90 degrees, you can do that. You can see by loosening that, you can change the angle, and then you could, if you want, lock it in at whatever angle you want. Tightening the bolts does not pull it one way or the other, so that means you have to square it, but also you could change it if you want, or if it doesn't come at 90, it's always nice to be able to adjust. Let's talk about changing the belt, because I personally have to do one. Now, you don't have to take this guy off, but I find it a lot easier. And for us to talk about the tensioning and the raising and lowering, I'm also going to just take this off now, but it can be taken off without removing this, as it is open on the other side to slide out. Now from the front here, we can see 2 orange areas. This is our tracking to move the belt back and forth across the rollers to center it, and then this is our tensioning. To remove the belt, we need to flip this around and raise this up a little bit to clear the brace that this sits on here. This belt slides on and off this way. So I'm going to show you how we do this. This is going to be the raising and lowering mechanism as well. This bolt right here in the corner loosens and tightens, and that's what holds down this arm from raising and lowering. You don't have to undo it a ton. It's easier to get up like that. You can actually go kind of more at like 45 degrees, to be honest. Tighten it back down. Now we can release our tension lever here to give us some flexibility. And you just kind of roll this off. It's easier if you just roll it back and forth. Again, make sure this is up. It cannot clear this little guy if it is down. You will struggle, maybe impossible, to get the belt off of there if this is down at 90 degrees. You need to have this up at something like 45. Now, throwing on a belt is pretty simple. It's just the reverse. These obviously come packaged like this, so they're a little kind of awkward at first. I have tensioned this extra, so mine is a little tighter than how it came because I felt the belts were too loose. So yours will probably slip on even easier when you first get it. And we just pull that guy down. And that's all we got to do to change the belt. Now we will lower this back down. This guy helps with dust collection as well. Now when we're talking about belt tensioning, we first have to kind of determine whether we're right out of the box or not. You want to give this guy a squeeze, and they say you should get between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch of kind of give. Mine was giving a lot more than that, so I obviously tightened it down. Now, to access this, I cannot overemphasize. Be very careful when you're taking these off. I had to replace this one. It was so tight. I don't know who at the factory decided. I thought there was going to be some Loctite on there. It was so tight. I stripped out basically this one here and replaced it. And the internal ones I saved by not going too crazy. So after we've removed that outer panel, the way this works is that there's essentially a bolt down here that works as a spreader between these 2 wheels right here. And there are 3 bolts you have to loosen up here. 1, 2, and 3 up behind here. It is not this guy down here. It is these 3 Phillips head bolts behind the belt, and that will allow some travel in this entire mechanism. Now once you've loosened that, this bolt down here is what pulls it in or out. So you will come down, and this is a little hard to access, but the Allen wrench included just fits in there. Now once you have undone these 3 Phillips heads here, loosening counterclockwise will release some tension, loosening up our sanding belt on top, and going clockwise on this bolt down here will make it tighter. Now as you go with this bolt, again down here, do a little bit at a time, try it, test the fit, and then come back. Don't go crazy. Once you have got it to where you think the tensioning is correct, you come back in and you tighten all 3 of these Phillips head there as well. And then you go ahead and you place the cover on the back. Now it took me a little while, maybe 15 minutes, to play around with this and tighten it. And one thing we also have to look out for is not just the give, but the vibration of the machine. One way to surefire tell that you are going too tight or too loose is if this thing really vibrates a bunch. It has a natural vibration just from running, but it's not much. You'll notice right away when it starts just shaking if you've got it too tight or too loose. I hit the too tight point myself and had to back off a little bit. A machinist friend once told me to always put positive tension on things, so I then backed it off a little more than I wanted, tightened it a tiny bit, and then locked it in place. That was just a rule of thumb. He always told me, place positive tension on tightening bolts, then go ahead and lock it back into place. So once you're done playing with that, you tighten those three. We'll go ahead and put the cover back on. When I was tightening these back down, I felt no need to crank like crazy like the factory had done. I just applied pressure until I couldn't easily apply any more pressure. I've had no problem since, but just be careful. These will strip out. The three of those, they're very cheap quality. And honestly, if you have access to a direct replacement for those and they're better quality bolts, I would just replace them while you're in here anyways. Once you've got that back on there, you should now have the appropriate tension, and you can always just go double check one more time by pinching this and seeing how much it lifts. Once we're pretty sure we have the appropriate tension on here, we're going to want to track that new belt that's on here. Again, we're looking for the left to right movement on the top. Using this knob right here, you have to turn it on while it's doing it. And come over top and take a look. We're going to try to just do our best to center it on the wheels. Underneath there, you'll notice there is a metal pad, which is going to give some backing. So we want it pretty close to on the center of that. And just like that, I am tracked on there pretty well, centered on the edges of these two. Once we've got our tracking and tensioning done, we can go ahead and apply the top and the table. If you have a small square, that'll allow you to get these to 90 degrees. For this guy, again, we are coming and looking at these two bolt holes right here with these two bolts. We are going this way with the down 90-degree angle facing towards the bed. And when we put this on here, we want to make sure we are not sitting on the belt. We don't want that rubbing on the belt, or we're going to wear our belt out very fast. I like to tighten one of them, the bottom one, and then allow the top one to be a little loose so I can adjust to square. Just come in here, give it a good push. That looks pretty good to me. Go ahead and fully tighten these down. Coming back to put this table on, we are just identifying this hole right here on top with this guy right here. And then you have to feed this through the angle here into the hole. It's a little hard to find at first. This one is a bit harder to square, mainly because when you go to turn this tension knob, it wants to pull it down as you go and make the final adjustment. So you have to kind of set your square on there, hold it taut. As you're going, keep applying pressure upward. It's very difficult. It's not the easiest process. I wish there was some kind of stop you could set. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So you may have a little back and forth, but as you can see, because we are not connected anywhere over here, this is as tight as I can get it, and it has some give to it, which if you're applying pressure and something absolutely has to be at 90 degrees, that's going to be a bit of a problem. So you cannot place a ton of pressure on this while you're going across this disc, or else you will deflect it. Now, before I get into test footage and showing it in use, let's just talk about my opinion, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the of this disc sander. Let's talk about the good things first. And some of these will also be under the and the bad, depending upon how you want to use this and what your expectations are. First up, it's $99 plus whatever your tax is. That's incredibly cheap for the functionality of this machine. And in general, the build quality at that price, I think is pretty good. You can pay more than that for a couple screwdrivers, and you're getting a 4.3 amp motor, which to me feels like plenty for something this size to do sanding on. It can be quite aggressive, especially if you apply a low grit on there. So if you're looking to remove a lot of material very fast, the motor is big enough to do that with the right grit on there. Quality-wise, I think this is what you need to accept for $99. I keep repeating that because it is so cheap. In my opinion, this whole thing should cost more than $99, but it's only $99. So I'm okay with aluminum here, some plastic here. We've got cast iron, we've got some steel. The screws, I think there's a little question mark there. I shouldn't be stripping screws just trying to tension the belt, or rather getting them out just so I can tension it. I would certainly say to when you've got to use something stronger there. But overall, build quality, very happy with it. I don't imagine anything will break. Maybe with some heavy, crazy use, you could break something, but a lot of the plastic parts are in areas where I don't think they're going to be getting a lot of hard use. I mean, maybe enough times with the tension lever and you could eventually break it or kind of break the mechanism. I don't know. I expect this to last for years. Now, because this is a low-cost, popular, hobbyist kind of machine, we've got a lot of accessories we can get with this. These grits are pretty easy to find in a variety of grits for the belts. They're very cheap. Now, in terms of the 6-inch sanding discs, I wanted 220 mainly, or 240, whatever they sell this as. And I could not find packs that were just 240, but I went with PowerTech, a variety pack, and then, I don't know, 10 belts or something. All of this for maybe $30. This is gonna last me a long time. So the ability to kind of get rid of old belts when they're just a little worn down, it's not as effective, and not worry about the cost is great. Obviously, the bigger the machine, the more expensive it is to replace the consumable parts of it. Anyone with a big bandsaw will know that those replacement bandsaw blades are very expensive. I was very happy to find out that I could get a lot of these for cheap. They seem to work quite well. PowerTech always does a pretty good job with this kind of middle of the road consumable option for a lot of different machines. Now, when we're talking about consumables and PowerTech, you will absolutely need one of these erasers or you will very quickly clog this up and not have it be useful. If you are ripping through these belts and you're wondering why they're not lasting, you need one of these eraser things. I don't know what this is. Maybe it's just a piece of rubber. Whatever it is, they work incredibly well. Now, the dust collection doesn't catch as much of this as it does the dust, so it's a little messy. You absolutely have to get one of these erasers. They're like, I don't know, $8 to $10, something like that, and they will last a very long time. And they are essential when using this type of machine, or else you will be changing out belts every time it gets minorly clogged because it's not working as well. Up next in terms of the good is I actually think the dust collection works relatively well. It fits your standard 2 1/4, I think is what they are, hoses. So your rigid vac, your common shop vac hoses, they fit right in there. And it honestly works pretty well considering that this is kind of just open. These are open areas. It generally pulls the dust in. Now having this guy on makes it not quite as efficient because some of the dust will hit this, but I was quite happy with how much dust was collected in the end through the simple 2 1/4 port down there. And I'm always very happy when a tool has a port that fits common shop vacs and stuff like that. I don't want any of that crap where it's got some proprietary size. Nobody wants that. Now, I'm not quite sure what the use for the vertical is for me personally. I haven't got there yet, but I love having options in my tools and the ability to raise this up. Very cool. Like I said, I don't quite know what I would use it for with that. I'm sure if I find that thing, it'll immediately hit me. Let me know in the comments below if you know exactly what you'd be doing with that raising. But I love that option just in case there is a time, and it's very quick and simple. Tightening a single bolt, raise it up and down, and then we've got a nice little stop under there so we don't have to try to balance it as we're tightening it. Now, last up in the good, other than we'll get into the testing and actual usage later because that's going to depend upon what you really want to use it for and whether it's good or for that. But the last good is that I like adjustable machines. I want something where I can adjust the belt, possibly change the belt in the future if something is wrong. I like that I can move this table. I like that I can track this. I do not love relying on manufacturers getting things perfect and then me just hoping it gets to me perfect. Shipping can just, it's all crazy, things shaking around. I love it when I personally can make sure something is set up correctly, and this has the ability to do all of that. Now let's get on to the bad, I'll call it bad, the and bad. First is that this table right here obviously has a lot of play in it. Included with this is a little miter gauge, which also has a ton of play in it. You would need to either put some tape on here maybe or put a punch in there, something like that. But I don't think unless you adjust this little guy, you're going to be doing any kind of very precise angle work. Now you can do some rough angle work, absolutely, but there's just too much play in both the table and the miter slot for that to be perfectly precise. However, being able to adjust it to a variety of angles, both that way and as a normal miter gauge, is awesome. I think that's very cool that you can just kind of quickly take down an edge or something like that at a specific angle. as long as it doesn't have to be extremely precise. But I would expect on higher quality, higher priced machines that play probably isn't there. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's something where I assume in this price bracket, that's kind of what we have to accept. Now, again, following on with the bad, this is very aggressive. So depending upon your usage, even with 240 grit on there, I cannot overstate, especially on softwood, softer hardwoods, how quickly it will just obliterate certain things. So we have to be very careful with that, and you have to know kind of the technique. I would definitely get some scrap pieces in practice so you understand. Because it is aggressive, it also, if you are not holding on to something tight enough, will just rocket that thing off into the moon. Except the problem is, this little guy is here, which I guess that means it doesn't rocket out. It rockets into that, flies back up at you. I've had that a few times. You also have to be very careful about the direction you're going here. If you end up going in the wrong direction, the motor is relatively powerful for this size. So this thing can just obliterate and fly stuff across the room if you happen to go in the wrong direction or you happen to not be holding something hard enough and it grabs on there. That's a I guess, because it means it's got a decent sized motor and it's pretty good at removing material, but just be careful. The next thing, and I think this is probably going to be true of any disc sander, is that these seem to be single use. Again, I haven't had the need to change one yet, so somebody let me know. But based on most adhesive things I've ever seen, it's kind of a one and done. You stick it on, once you take it off, it's lost some of its adhesive. When I took the one off that was on there from the start, I actually had to get out some mineral spirits and clean off some of the adhesive that pulled off, because we obviously need this to be very flat up against there. We can't have any kind of lumps underneath it. So there was a little work in changing that in terms of cleaning off the plate. But I assume all disc sanders use that same metal plate with adhesive, so that's not really something specific to this, but something that I didn't know ahead of time, and it's like, okay, I get it. Unfortunate, but I get it. The final one in the maybe bad is, like I said, there's not a lot of good clamping points, and it actually doesn't sit directly onto the table. There are a little kind of knob, not a knob, what's the word? This little kind of portion of metal that comes out. So you can't stick a clamp here or else it will pull it down. You can see that rocking. For whatever reason, this is not just a flat piece there. Maybe so you can vacuum under it. I'm not quite sure. So you're going to have to bolt it into some kind of plywood or something else if you want to be able to put it on your bench and clamp it down. Personally, I just clamped it or bolted it to a tool cart. No problem, it bolts down really well. Obviously, with a lot of these bench tops, it's a little hard to get in there to bolt things, but overall, pretty simple. And I actually don't mind that it only uses 3 bolts. It's kind of hard sometimes lining up 4 of them, so having 3, I've had no problems with it moving or anything like that. I like that there's a decent length extension cord on here, probably 4 or 6 feet, something like that. If you have to reach an outlet or you're moving a tool cart around and need to reach an extension cord, something like that, it's always nice to have that little bit extra extension to get where you're going. That's going to wrap up the basic good, bad, all of that. I'm happy with it. I really am. I'm really glad I got it. $99. I assume this kind of size tool and this kind of build is going to go up in the future. I don't know if this could stay at $99 forever. So if you're looking at one of these, go ahead and get it now, in my opinion. I think it's very useful. I don't use it all the time, but when I need it, it's really nice to have it. And I'm doing a project right now, and I'll show you in some testing. I'm making these little boxes, and for kind of doing the early rough sanding of these, it's absolutely perfect. Now, depending upon what you're doing, the size may be an extreme limitation here. You may need a much larger one, or you may have to take this off, which is, like I said, can fly off of there. It's only about 13 inches of flat usable space. And when you take this onto here, you're down to maybe like 10, 11 or so. So you couldn't do like a 12-inch drawer without removing this, which means it's harder to keep it at 90. But for smaller things, this is absolutely great. For kind of rounding over edges, if you don't need it to be super precise, it's great. Very happy with it. All right, let's get into the testing now. For the first portion of the testing, I just want to show you the dust collection. I've thrown back on the 80 here, so super aggressive. And you'll notice here that the closer you are to this end, in this area in particular, the more the dust is pulled in. If you're sanding way back here, it's going to also be up and over. So I'll start without dust collection. I'll let you see, and then I will clean this off, throw the vacuum on there, and then you can see what it is like with dust collection. And there you can see quite a lot, but noticeably better the closer your piece is to this area and going down. The way this essentially works is it's just an open area in here, and the dust gets directed that way and pulled down if you have the vacuum on. All right, this is going to be 80 grit with dust collection. As I'm sure you can see, even with dust collection, if we are sanding way back out in this area, there's not much it can do to catch the dust flying up. But when we are up in this area and we're, facing closer to this dust collection port, significantly better. So when you're doing your sanding, try to keep it closer to this front area to get maximum dust collection. But this is just a messy machine. It's going to put dust even with a good dust collector. There's only so much it can do because it relies on the dust being directed into certain areas. I'm going to now show you the dust collection down here. Now, one of the keys with this sanding disc is to always come this way. You want to pull into it. It has a very big red arrow. It spins that way. If you feed this way, it is going to rocket this thing up and off of here. As you can see, this is elm. This is not a soft wood. It very quickly took away these corners. This is 240 grit. And when the dust is even finer, unlike the 80, it can pull more of it. But this does a really good job of collecting the dust and pulling it back down and in there. And you can see how quickly that took these two corners off. Like I said, it's elm, not the softest wood in the world. Up next, I just want to show you the disc sander and why I don't think it's particularly good for any sort of precise work. I'm just going to mark this up. This was cut at 45 degrees. I've put it to their registered 45 degrees. But again, we have all this play right here, which is just super problematic. And remember, we're going to pull left to right, and we'll see how good of a job it does. If it does a good job, it should remove all of this uniformly, as this is at exactly 45 degrees. I hope you can see there the amount of movement. So even when I've got it held against, this little guy can move so much, which is just going to change any angle. You're going to struggle to keep some kind of precise angle. Now, maybe you can clean it up. Maybe you can put some blue tape on this to tighten it up a bit, and it can work really well. But it can certainly remove material. I just would be willing to bet that that's nowhere near as close to 45 as this guy is. But for what it is, obviously, you can't ask for incredible precision from a $99, $100, something like that sander. Up next, let's test an angle. And we'll just try to do an edge here and see how we can do. Freehand it, we'll just freehand it. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be able to explain to you what exactly this would be used for. I'm sure somebody has a setup, but it does a really decent job at whatever this type of sanding angle would be. Leaves a really nice clean surface on there. Obviously, again, the problems here, this thing just has some play in it, which, depending upon how much precision you care about, could either be not a problem at all or a really big problem. Now, there are a couple reasons why I specifically bought this. One was to clean off bandsaw marks on things that I don't need to be perfectly flat or straight. And the other was to kind of flush box joints off. And unfortunately, I've already done all of these before I did the video, but it's incredibly effective at just coming up here, dropping it down 20 seconds later, even with that 220 grit, flushing up all those box joints. Now, the 220, while it's aggressive for what I would consider 220, it's not going to hog off a ton of material. You're going to need to step down a grit. But because I'm only looking for kind of finessing things at this point with how I generally use this, I leave the 220 on there. But I'll show you exactly with the bandsaw marks how quickly it can get these out. Unbelievably fast, right? Now, you might say this is pine. Fair enough. So I've freehand ripped some walnut here. This thing's not even close to straight or flat to start. So let's see how long it takes to get those bandsaw marks off of there. And remember, this is not like a jointer or a straight line ripping jig. It's not going to leave you with a nice perfect 90, perfectly flat, any of that, unless you are perfect at how you hold this. It will follow where you put the pressure, is kind of what I want to say here. So if you're tipping a little too far this way, it's going to take that right off. If you're pushing too hard down on the front, it's going to take more off of there. And there it is, all of the bandsaw marks removed. Now, of course, it's not perfectly flat. You can see there's a gap over here, and it's almost certainly because of how I applied pressure at some point. I attempt to, as you saw, flip things around to try to even out pressure, but this is not for creating precision straight edges, but it does clean up one really nicely if you're coming off the bandsaw and you just need the bandsaw marks removed. One of the other main reasons I bought this was to kind of do some detail sanding on tinier pieces, both kind of beveling edges, cleaning stuff up like that on either one of these. So I'll show you now. And the biggest thing with small pieces is you have to make sure you are holding it tight, because this will grab it and it will smash it into this thing or fling it off of this thing. So it's all about you making sure you grip it really well. As you can see, very effective there. Now, like I said before, so much of this is how you manipulate the piece. If you're looking for a nice, even kind of round over, if this is at 90 degrees, this is going to be what you want to use. Everything up here is going to be dependent upon you placing correct pressure, correct angles. It's very easy to go and not have a totally straight edge. You can see there's less on this side, likely because when I placed it down, I put too much pressure on one side or the other. It's a lot of user manipulation, and that's great because then that allows you to do certain other things. You're not locked into doing something specific. But if you need something to be rounded over at a nice even amount across, don't try to freehand it. Try to come down to this table. As long as you set this at 90, it's going to work pretty well. The last thing before I flip it up and I just show a little vertical demonstration, let's see how it does at just removing this little bit of stain spillover and some pencil and marking gauge marks. This is, again, 220, not an amazing material remover, closer to finish, and the sanding grit I want before I stain the outside here. And there we have it. Obviously, lower grit is going to do this faster. If I had some 150, I'd probably chuck it on for this. But I'm very happy with that. Very smooth. And I think one of the key things is that you don't get terrible sanding marks. As long as they're with the grain, they're not too bad. Though I will still be hand sanding this to finish just lightly with 220 because there are some scratches. But for things like flushing up box joints and just cleaning up some pencil marks on the side and stuff like that, works great for that. I use this many times to keep it clean because it very quickly builds up dust. And if you do not clean that out of there, you essentially just end up burnishing this because there's no abrasive pulling it away. It's like you're just rubbing a really kind of soft something, or really conversely really hard something actually, up against the wood and burnishing it. You've got to keep it clean to get the actual sanding action out of there. Here it is in vertical mode. Now, don't hate on me. As I said before, I have no idea what the exact purpose of vertical mode is, but if you do, then it's for you, and that's great. It's great to have options. Is it beveling long items? I don't quite know. I don't really see the advantage of doing it like this. Maybe some kind of, I don't know. I have no idea, to be honest. But please tell me down below, because if there's some function here that I could use that I don't know about, that would be awesome. That's going to do it for today. This is one of those tools that at $100, you may not have a need for it. You may be able to do what it does with other tools, but it's really handy. It does take up some space. So I will not by any means say that this is a tool you need, that it's the most important tool. But when I do find myself wanting to use it for a specific task, it's much better at that and much more efficient at that than however I was doing it otherwise. So I would say at $100, even if it went up to 110, 120, something like that, I would put this on the list. And when you get down to your list and the more important things, and this comes along, I would not hesitate a ton to buy it at that position. It's only going to get used for very specific things, but it's very good at what it's meant to do. Now, as with many of the Wen tools or the benchtop tools in general, there are numerous other brands that sell ones that look nearly identical. Rikon always sells a more expensive version that looks nearly identical. I'm not sure what is better about those or if it's just purely paying more for branding. I know Grizzly sells one that looks almost exactly like this. I like this one, $100. I think that's a good price. We've got cast iron base, plastic, but I'm sure they all have plastic, some aluminum, some steel. I don't see what you could do to this really that could make it worth $100 more. Maybe you can. If somebody has the Raycon version or something like that, let me know if you notice any differences in the one you have than this. All right, have a good one. Thank you.